Ladies and gentlemen, the knives are out for the FBI. The president, as you know, is pretty much calling out the FBI and has been for a long time as part of a cabal to take him down.
They're the deep state.
And there are some provocative threads of evidence that make you wonder. This guy, Peter Strokes, who was having an affair with Lisa Page, and the missing text messages, and clearly Peter Strokes was hostile to candidate Trump and presumably President Trump. But what does that mean in terms? Does that mean there's a deep state secret society out to take down the president? Let's talk about this with former FBI Special Agent Bobby Chacon. Bobby, how are you?
Good, Doug. Good morning, Leanne. Thanks for having me.
Good morning.
Always appreciate you coming on with us. So this is serious stuff. The FBI has thousands and thousands of employees, and they are human beings, and they're going to have their own political opinions. That's not just true today in these polarized times. That's always been true. Sure. But and there were always concerns back in the sort of the wretched excess days of J. Edgar Hoover, when we now know that Hoover had a disproportionate power because he had personal files on political figures and could leverage that into whatever basically he wanted. And there have been a lot of reforms instituted since then. But what do you make of the time we live, where James Comey is basically everybody's enemy, and the agency finds itself in the middle of a great partisan political controversy?
Well, I think it's part and parcel of our entire political divide. It's just now reached the far ends of our government, and the FBI used to be, one of the most independent and autonomous agencies out there, and just the political divide that's infected every other area of our government, be it, the IRS targeting conservative groups, and, these kind of things have kind of extended, and now they've reached, nuclear proportions once the FBI gets weaponized, or if it gets politically active. It's extremely dangerous territory. But I think it's not. I think it's just endemic of the entire political divide. It was going to get there just because of the sick environment inside the Beltway. It's just these people don't have the best interests of our country at heart. They have their own political agendas at the very top of their priority list.
The consequences of this are enormous, because if the FBI is viewed as a political wing of one party or another, and that is how it's perceived, because certainly the left now, the Democrats, many of them see Jeff Sessions as the head of the Justice Department, as swinging the Justice Department as a political cudgel against left-wing targets. And obviously there were many people on the right who believed that when the Justice Department was being run by Loretta Lynch or Eric Holder, it was being used to, even the IRS was being used as a weapon against conservative groups. So, and I'm not naive. These things can happen. They absolutely can happen. But how do we clear it? Because how do we get to the bottom of it? Because we're in a preposterous situation now where we're investigating the investigations. And pretty soon we'll be investigating the investigation that's investigating the investigation. I mean, this is like one of those Russian nesting dolls. As long as we're keeping Russian themes here, we might as well go there, right?
Right. I mean, I think what has to happen is Mueller has to wrap up his investigation first. And then, because there are times when you have to investigate an investigation. It's just the way it is. There are sometimes there's improprieties that happen during an investigation. They have to be looked at. But the investigation itself has to proceed. And some will say that, well, if it's politically tainted from the beginning, then you can't let the investigation proceed. Well, I myself personally have faith in Mueller. I gotta think he's towards the end of this investigation. If he's talking about interviewing Trump, that would be the last person you'd want to interview in an investigation like this. So the end is near. I think we have to sort out what's going to come of that. I understand this frustration between how differently this investigation was handled than the Hillary Clinton email investigation. investigation, whereas there was no grand jury impaneled in that one, and there's a grand. You could have easily charged many people in the email investigation, the Clinton email, with 1,001 violations, lying to the FBI. Huma Abedin, we now know, lied to the FBI. Cheryl Mills, we now know, and there's a lot of frustration to how things were handled differently. Well, that's in the past. Mueller has to wrap up this investigation, and then there has to be a critical look at how things happen. But we need to get past the Mueller investigation into Russian whatever collusion is. I still unclear about that. But we have to get past the Mueller investigation. That has to be the first thing that ends, and then the smoke has to clear, things have to settle, and then there has to be at least somewhat of an objective look at how things developed and how it happened. Personally, I think there's too many people that come over from the Justice Department running the FBI. We don't need an FBI director that's a previous Justice Department high-level official. We had it with Mueller. We had it with Comey. Now we have it with Wray. Things get too messy when they come over from the Justice Department and they're political, and the Justice Department is much more political than the FBI. They bring in their top team to occupy the top echelon of the FBI, and the FBI has been damaged from that. You know, when you and I talked last year about who the new FBI director should be, I said it shouldn't be someone from DOJ, and I think that's part of the big problem. But I think to your question, I think the Mueller investigation has to be wrapped up, and then a critical look has to be made at how the investigation was carried out and if any improprieties happened during the investigation.
We're talking about Bobby Chacon as a former FBI special agent. You can follow on Twitter at Bobby Chacon FBI. You know, the right now, there's a core of conservative politicians who are putting great heat on the FBI. They're calling for a special prosecutor to look into the FBI. There are even, by the way, people who want to open up an investigation into Barack Obama. And put a special prosecutor to drag him into this, either because of the politicization of the FBI or his lack of action when he was first notified that the Russians were meddling in the election. Why did President Obama not use the bully pulpit of the administration, of the presidency, to sound the alarm bells? And Joe Biden was out talking about this, saying, well, the reason is that Mitch McConnell wouldn't agree to a bipartisan statement, and if he had come out and said something right before the election, it would have looked bad, and blah, 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 and all of this double talk. We have so little confidence in any institution today. The president is a human wrecking ball who wants to disrupt, basically, civil society as we've known it. And he's got a lot of people cheering him on to do that. And I'm fine with that to an extent. But I want to know, what are you building in its place? And that to me is not clear, because it's easy to tear down. Terrorists do that. It's not so easy to build the World Trade Center. It's easy to knock things down.
Right, and that's the danger here. I think that, you know, whether you liked Bill Clinton or whether you liked George Bush or Barack Obama, there was always a sense that, you know, there was an adult in the room, and there was a calming influence, and as divisive as Barack Obama, some people thought of Barack Obama was, you know, the rhetoric never ratcheted up to the level we're seeing now, and the personal attacks never got up. And the debate you actually just mentioned during the summer of 2006 raged inside the White House. I happen to know that, about whether the president should come out with a stronger statement against the Russian meddling. And I actually interviewed Leon Panetta for an upcoming project I have. And Secretary Panetta, you know, was very frank with me that he thought the White House should have taken a stronger stand. Instead, they made the October 6, 2016 statement on a Friday afternoon, and he let it come from the Department of Homeland Security instead of the White House. So there was people inside the Obama White House that wanted a stronger stance against the Russians, and some people feel even today that it cost Hillary Clinton the election that Obama didn't come out stronger against the Russians. You know, but that was an internal debate that White House had. In the end, you know, even if you disagree with the man's job in office, he was more of a calming influence, if you will, even though people see him as evil and some people see him as a messiah. So, you know, right now we don't have any calming influence. We don't have anybody at the top in either, you know, Congress or the White House that is a calming influence. And can you get everybody to step back from the ledge and say, hey, let's take a breath and let's bring back some reason and some, civility to this discussion, and let's let everything shake out. It seems like there's just this ability to ratchet things up and then to ratchet it higher, and there's this kind of contest on who can get more, vitriolic with the rhetoric. And I don't see anyone on the political landscape that is willing to step in and urge everybody to take a breath.
And I don't know that there's any way to make that stick in society, because social media is in a feeding frenzy, and left and right are just, resharing their heavily skewed memes that are either outright lies or certainly partial truths, which is a gussied up lie. And that's a whole other problem. People just keep digging in with more and more vitriol. The net effect of all of this is that now we've got the president saying that he's looking forward to talking to Robert Mueller, and then presumably there will be negotiations over that. We all remember the famous deposition that Bill Clinton gave back in the Monica Lewinsky days with Ken Starr, and that deposition was taped and ultimately televised. And anything that the president does, we have to wonder whether or not the same thing will happen. And then with whatever he says, does Mueller have to go back and re-interview people based on what the president would say?
Well, I mean, that's normally, that might happen. But, you would have to think that before you get Donald Trump into a room to interview him, you have squeezed out every drop of evidence or every drop of information from every source that you could possibly get. If they interview Trump and then they go back and start interviewing other people, that's worse news for those other people, because that means they're just trying to catch them in a lie. And what's the ultimate goal of the investigation? Is it to catch people in lies? Every person I almost ever interviewed in my 27 years in the FBI lied to me. I never charged anyone with a 1001 violation. That's not your main focus of an investigation. It's a sidelight. It's a tool that you use sometimes, but it's not really what you go after people for. And so what's the purpose and the objective of the investigation? If it's to determine whether there was Russian collusion, then you determine whether there was Russian. And if there wasn't any collusion with anyone in the Trump campaign, with anyone, in the Russian government, then that should end it. And these other small-time charges that are brought to put pressure on people and to try to twist arms of people, then that should all just kind of go away. And it should just, they should take whatever small penalties they get for that kind of thing. But, you can, somebody that's done international business like Trump has, you can go back a long way and find a lot of improprieties, I'm sure, in tax laws and in business laws and things like that, if you want to. But is that the objective of this investigation?
Bobby,
and if it isn't, then it should end.
Bobby, last question: is there a secret society within the FBI?
No, and I think that reference in that email it almost seems like it was a joking reference. And I'm not a big fan of either of the people that were involved in that exchange, but I don't really think that was a serious reference.
As always, Bobby, thank you so much for coming on with us. We appreciate it. Follow Bobby on Twitter at Bobby Chacon FBI.